All right, so the corporate media smear campaign against Bernie Sanders has begun, and it's not only disgusting, but it's pretty transparent as well. Just yesterday, we were talking about Bernie has taken the lead in a key gold standard Iowa poll, the Des Moines Register poll. And here's how CNN spun it, and here's how MSNBC spun it, and the smears are now starting to ramp up. And the big breaking story from yesterday, the first weekday after Bernie did really well in that Des Moines Register poll, is that allegedly Bernie told Elizabeth Warren in private nearly 2 years ago that a woman can't win the 2020 presidential election. And Elizabeth Warren has now sort of confirmed it. And lo and behold, what a coincidence. The story about this conversation was broken by CNN yesterday, and CNN just happens to be hosting tonight's Democratic presidential debate. This is one of those really important stories to dissect because there are there are really three stories here, and I'm not seeing anybody talk about all of them. So let's do that. Story number one is what we knew would happen. I mean, as Bernie's viability as a possible Democratic nominee became more clear, corporate media, which is in league with the establishment, would do more and more to smear Bernie Sanders. It's happening. It happened within hours of me going live with that story yesterday. I don't actually think we need to spend that much time on that story today because we just did a bunch about it yesterday. I think most of you understand it. We just happened to report that it would be happening rather than reporting about it after the fact. I think we're all on the same page as far as that story goes. Story number two is whether the assertion is true. So let's discuss that now. What are the facts that are being alleged here? The claim is that back in December of 2018, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, who are friends, met at Elizabeth Warren's apartment in Washington, D.C. They knew they'd likely be running against each other to the end of the Democratic presidential campaign. They reportedly agreed, let's be civil with each other. Let's not attack each other. Let's avoid hurting the progressive movement. Great. Seems that that part is the agreed upon context of this meeting. As the story was told to CNN by four sources that they cite, who I'll talk about soon, Elizabeth Warren reportedly said to Bernie, I think I can make a robust argument about the economy. I think if I run, I can earn broad support from women voters. And Bernie Sanders responded that he does not believe a woman can win. Presumably, he meant in 2020, running against incumbent Donald Trump. So who are the sources? CNN cites four people. Two people Elizabeth Warren spoke with directly after the encounter. Two people that are familiar with the meeting. That's what CNN says. Three of those four sources said that Elizabeth Warren told Bernie Sanders she disagrees with his assessment that a woman could not win. So we were very quickly dealing with, is the report accurate? Bernie Sanders denied that the characterization of his statement is accurate. I think that's important, and I'll explain why when we get to part three of this story. And then Elizabeth Warren put out a statement yesterday saying that, indeed, this is something Bernie Sanders said. Elizabeth Warren saying, Bernie and I met for more than 2 hours in December of 2018 to discuss the 2020 election, our past work together, and our shared goals, beating Donald Trump, taking back our government from the wealthy and well-connected, and building an economy that works for everyone. Among the topics that came up was what would happen if Democrats nominated a female candidate. I thought a woman could win. He disagreed. I have no interest in discussing this private meeting any further because Bernie and I have far more in common than our differences on punditry. I'm in this race to talk about about what's broken in the country and how to fix it. That's what I'm going to continue to do. I know Bernie's in the race for the same reason. We have been friends and allies in this fight for a long time, and I have no doubt we will continue to work together to defeat Donald Trump and put our government on the side of the people. So again, she says we disagreed about whether a woman could win, which gets us to layer number three, which is the context here. The story is being framed as Bernie simply saying, women cannot be president. Do any of you believe Bernie Sanders would say something equivalent to a woman cannot be president of the United States? Here is Bernie a long time ago saying a woman can be president of the United States.
The real issue is not whether you're black or white, whether you're a woman or a man. In my view, a woman could be elected president of the United States. The real issue is Whose side are you on? Are you on the side of workers and poor people, or are you on the side of big money and the corporations?
So aside from whether the assertions about what was said are true, the real tragedy here is that this is being portrayed as evidence of Bernie's sexism or misogyny or whatever. And it simply is not that. And if there's a criticism of Elizabeth Warren here, and there is, it's that she, in her statement, alludes to the context, but doesn't straight up say the context is not a sexist context. It's a disagreement over whether, in the political environment in 2020 against Donald Trump, a female Democratic candidate could be president. Now, Bernie could be wrong about that. Bernie Sanders might be of the opinion that because of sexism in the United States, or because of how Donald Trump has flouted norms when it comes to how you're supposed to treat women, that Bernie believes in 2020, sexism would cause a woman to lose to Donald Trump. Now, you can say it's such a broad statement. It doesn't make sense that any woman would lose. If it's the right woman, women are so different. It makes no sense to say no woman could win. So you could say, I disagree with what Bernie said. And it sounds like that's what Elizabeth Warren said to him. But to say Bernie is sexist, even if he said it absent any context, is ridiculous. Let me give an example. Imagine that I said, I don't think a Jewish person can be president in 2020. Talking about Bernie Sanders, for example. Bernie Sanders is a Jewish man. Is that anti-Semitic? Of course not. If I believe that because of anti-Jewish bias and anti-Semitism and the rise of white nationalism, that a Jewish candidate would be unable to win in 2020, that's not anti-Semitic. Now, if I say Jews shouldn't be president, or no Jew could ever be president, or Jews simply should never run because of whatever, then we have something to talk about. So if Bernie's analysis of the country at the time is a woman couldn't win in 2020, that's not sexist. Now, I happen to disagree with Bernie. I think many people could defeat Donald Trump if they're the right people. They could be men, they could be women. The implicit smear of Bernie, if he said this, is where this goes on the rails. So at some point, Elizabeth Warren, if she does believe, because remember in her statement, she says, Bernie and I basically stand for the same things. We agree about what needs to happen in this country. He thinks a woman can't win. I think a woman can win. She should actually clarify and say, the discussion was not a discussion that is an adjudication of a woman in the role of the presidency. It was a strategic opinion about, given the circumstances in the country, whether a woman could or couldn't win. Elizabeth Warren should do the right thing and clarify that if that's what she believes, because she's playing coy. She's confirming the story that is being used to smear Bernie, alluding to context that is not a sexist context, but not saying it. So if you're asking me, should Elizabeth Warren clarify that? She absolutely should. When you see endless conservatives say a woman shouldn't be president, right? It's not an insane thing to question, could a woman win in 2020? The counterpoint, of course, is Hillary got millions more votes than Trump in 2016. And were it not for 77,000 votes in 3 states, she would have won. So I just disagree with Bernie's analysis, but that's all it is. If Bernie said, I don't think women should run for president, we are talking about something very, very different. So let's step back now, okay? Consider what's going on here. Weeks before the Iowa caucus, right after Bernie takes the lead in Iowa, takes a lead in California polling, out of the blue, CNN just happens to report, and Elizabeth Warren just so happens to recall, this 2-year-old conversation being couched as Bernie being sexist, which is completely antithetical to everything Bernie Sanders has fought for the last 40 years. So here's how it's going down. CNN published the story yesterday, and they just so happen to be hosting tonight's Democratic presidential debate. What a coincidence. Every minute during tonight's debate that is about this Bernie Warren thing helps Joe Biden. The prediction is when this issue invariably comes up tonight, Elizabeth Warren will refer to Bernie as her friend and say that they have a similar vision for what needs to happen in the U.S. Bernie Sanders will say, of course, a woman can be president, but moderators will keep going until they can generate something more salacious. After the debate, the spin will be Bernie and Warren getting very chippy there while elder statesman Biden was presidential. He was focused on policy. And of course, Biden will be able to focus on policy tonight because CNN won't bog him down with questions based on this article they wrote about Bernie and Warren, which will be used to justify questions during the debate tonight. So Bernie has been set up for an unwinnable situation in tonight's debate. If he tries to focus on the issues, he'll be accused of dodging the questions about Elizabeth Warren and sexism. If he buckles down and refutes the attack and says Elizabeth Warren should clarify the context was a strategic one, not a sexist one, he will be accused of being too mean in defending himself. And if he doesn't strongly defend himself, he'll be criticized for not strongly defending himself against the allegations. I said a couple of weeks ago, this election is going to be extra ugly. And I was mostly talking about the general. It's quickly getting that way in the primary. This is on day one where I said, I'm not going to participate in the smears that can only serve to divide the progressive movement and prop up an establishment candidate like Joe Biden. This is what we were talking about. This is exactly what we were talking about. So Elizabeth Warren, if she believes the context was not a sexist one, she believes what Bernie says, has been saying for a long time, that a woman certainly can be president and that this was a strategic discussion, she should clarify it because otherwise she is actually participating in dividing the movement. And we should very clearly state that absent context, this really doesn't tell us very much one way or the other. And in the end, this helps Joe Biden. Because remember, if this hurts Bernie, imagine that this goes shockingly well and it pulls 3 points of support from Bernie Sanders. And imagine that Elizabeth Warren gets all 3 of those points, even though the polling tells us she would really only get a third of any support that is pulled away from Bernie. But imagine that this costs Bernie 3 points and Warren gains 3 points. Biden's still winning. It still doesn't help Elizabeth Warren take the lead. And that's why this props up the establishment right now. The leading establishment candidate is Joe Biden. Tell me where you disagree. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. Follow me. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.